Welcome back to Best Kept Secrets. These are stories of survival and hope. And today we are so honored to have our founder and CEO, Samantha Foster, with us here. She is the founder and CEO of the Lifehouse Project. Welcome, Samantha.
Thank you for having me, Dawn. I'm glad to be
We're,
here.
yes, we're so thrilled you created this space that we've been able to share so many stories of survival and hope from people who have been, directly affected and people who serve in those areas. And so it's so lovely now to be able to share your story and what brought you to create this movement. And we'll talk more about that in another episode soon. But let's get to your life and what created the need for you to create the Lifehouse Project. And it started when you were 3 years old.
Yeah, yes. My mother started seeing a man, and this man he just started abusing us from the very first day. And I remember it's ingrained in my head, if you will, that first moment of him entering our life. And it was actually the car. And that's the first moment of feeling that fear, feeling unsafe. And the abuse immediately started on my mother. I mean, I remember it like it was yesterday, if you will. Even the smells of everything. So, yeah, it started at that very young age. And this is going to be the story that repeats itself time and time again throughout my life.
Yeah, because it's not just that there's this now new man in your life. So it's you and your brother and your mom.
Mhm.
And does he bring anything with him to the relationship?
He did. He ended up bringing two other children with him into the relationship, which are, I call them my stepsisters. I did grow up with them. So, yeah, so I have two older sisters.
Mm. So now you have this brand new blended family
Mhm.
and terror begins, is how you describe it.
Right, right. And absolutely, when you're unsafe. Um, but it was that very typical what now I realize. But of course, you don't know this when you're a child. You just know the fear and the terror of living with what you would call a sociopath narcissist.
Mm.
And there's different, of course, levels of narcissists. But a sociopath is one that disregards life, right? So it's more than just the mental torture and the mental abuse, but you've got the physical torture. And I'm not saying like, we were just whipped with a belt. I'm talking physical torture. Um, and, where people like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. But it does. It happens all the time here in America as well as worldwide. So my story, I don't think is untypical. It's actually a very typical story, but it was the fear of being harmed. And of course, the psychological abuse was starting at the same time. And this wasn't just like happened once a week or once a month, it was every day.
Yeah, you mentioned the like a physical reaction every time he walked by because you didn't know what was going to happen.
Right. Your whole body would tense up. The fear where you don't have a voice, you can't speak, and you live in total fear because you don't know what he's going to do to you. Just passing by, he's going to inflict some type of harm on you. Understand that it gave him a certain satisfaction. There was a certain delight, if you will, when he was able to inflict physical harm on a person, even
Mm.
of the tiniest physical harm, whether, it was pinching you in inappropriate spots to, just in whatever way he was going to inflict harm. It's like it's a driving mode for him. There was a satisfaction with that.
Hmm. And there was the physical torture of, you mentioned pinching and not just whipping with a belt, but there's an instance with your brother on the porch.
Yeah, he hung him up on the back porch and stripped him down and whipped him like a horse.
Mm,
And you know, there's there was you can take yourself to a place of safety when you're being harmed yourself. You can go to a place, right, to bear the pain or what's happening to you at that moment. But what does a child do when their siblings being beat and tortured where you don't know if they're going to live, and you stand frozen in that moment knowing that you're not allowed to help, you're not allowed to go get help, your mother's right across the room, silent, sitting on the couch doing nothing while this is happening. um that in itself is a whole nother emotional scar, if you will. It's something that you live with, and having to learn to cope with that throughout your life.
yeah, and you mentioned your mom being right across the way and not doing anything, but she was also a victim.
She was also a victim. And being a child and even a young adult, I hated my mother for letting this man abuse us. But what I didn't know and what I was ignorant to, until it started repeating in my adult life, was that she was a victim, and this is how victims work in their life. This is what happens, and that she was also victimized when she was a child.
Mm,
And so she was just repeating the same behavior, what she was taught, right? Just like when I became a young mother, or when I became an adult, I repeated the same type of cycle in my life. So there's a certain type of me having to forgive myself for hating her, if
mm.
that makes sense. Because she didn't know, and she didn't know how to get out, and she didn't have any help.
Yeah. So were there other people who knew they that weren't direct victims that could have done something?
Absolutely, the churches, right? um, we were kept isolated. They didn't want us, really watching TV. They didn't want us talking on the phone. They didn't want us having friends. Everything was heavily dominated and monitored. All communications were, but the church knew. Definitely that we were victims and there was abuse going on, and nobody stepped up to do anything. It really actually even came to the point where people, I think that maybe some people did mention something, and that's when they decided to take us out of school and homeschool us, right? I
Mhm.
think that's very typical of abusive homes, that they take the children out of schools, and away from people so that they can control the situation.
Yeah. Speaking of the church, you mentioned a spiritual abuse. Can you talk
Mhm.
about that a little bit?
So all of the everything that he inflicted upon my mother and us was all Bible driven, right? Like the verse about sparing the rod. If you spare the rod, you spoil the child, right? So that gave him complete permission to just beat and torture us, right? Because it's biblical. And the wife is supposed to, there's something in there about a wife saving the man, right? Saves her husband,
Mm.
so that so my mother being married to him, for then it absolves him of, I guess, his sins, so he can do whatever he wants and be absolved of all sin, because being married to her means that he was forgiven and that he can do that. Also, even some, one of the times with me, and we had people over at this point. There was another couple over from the church that he thought I lied about something. I was so young still at this age. I mean, I was younger than 10. And he took out the Bible verse and say, if the tongue offends thee, cut it off. So he took out his pocket knife and put it up to my tongue because he said I was lying. So he needs to cut off my tongue. So it's the stuff that we went through was very sadistic. It
Mm.
wasn't I'm just going to beat you and not feed you and ignored you. It was just a very sadistic individual.
Yeah.
The torture just is unexplainable, and this happens all the time. This is a regular basis.
Yeah. You and your brother were 6 at one point, and he made you work. What?
Yeah, we were punished.
Mm.
So my mother was around somebody who had hepatitis B. So me and my brother caught hepatitis B from my mother, and very much we were punished. And I remember having to go to the hospital. And I remember my stepfather coming up to me saying that I need to stop throwing up and I better behave and stop doing this because I'm causing harm to everybody and I'm causing harm to my mother. And so when we just got out of the hospital, then he said, "You need to work now." Right? We were punished for being sick. So we had to go outside still with hepatitis, and we had to pull weeds, do yard work, clean up, just clean up the yard from the dog. So so
Yeah.
it was a punishment for being ill. Yes.
Yeah. He was also sexually abusive to your mother and to you and your stepsisters.
Right. And I don't know of everybody he was sexually abusive to, but also his own sisters.
Mm.
So I don't think anybody, at least female, was safe from his sexual abuse. um that was just, chalk it up to one of the abuses that we had to endure, living under his household.
Mm. And then there was, do you think that that contributed to people not, like, what would you attribute people not stepping up who knew this was happening?
Fear.
Mm.
I think a lot of it was fear. One thing about abusers is that they learn to put people in fear. They learn to control people with fear. So they very much go, and you may not see it, but they go and they threaten the people in whatever way. And they're smart about it where they can't prove it, but they do threaten people who want to turn it in or step in and intervene. So there's that fear there that they instill in other people. And another reason is that people don't want to get involved with such ugliness. They would rather shove it under the rug and not notice it. Like, what? It doesn't affect me. It's not my business.
Mm.
So you also have, I think, that side of society, that sweeps it under the rug.
Yeah,
Somebody should have stepped up and did something, and nobody did. And there was plenty of people who knew.
definitely. And then you find at age 10 or 11, you're introduced to another level of abuse.
Right, yes. So, me and my brother's place of safety was my grandparents. And at the age around 9 years old, as I started developing, my grandfather started to sexually molest me. Um, my only place of safety now is riddled with abuse, if you will. It's no longer a safe place. So it was a turning point in my life where now I know that I didn't have anybody. Now I know that I had no place of safety, and there was nowhere for me to be safe. That even the people you think you're safe around will betray you and they
Mm,
will hurt you.
yeah. And that continues on
It
for,
does. It continues on for 2, 3 years. And at one point, a couple years down the road, he does finally ask me, "Do you like that?" And I said, "No." And he stopped.
mm,
But, that trust and that sense of his being safe is already shattered. It's gone, right?
yeah,
There's no turning back the clock on that.
absolutely. So then you are runaway at 16. So during this time, you're still inflicted, the abuse from your stepfather is still being inflicted on you, the terror. There is physical, spiritual, sexual abuse.
Yeah.
You have this like slight refuge into your grandparents, but that's taken away from you. And then now at 16, you decide you want to go to high school.
Right, right.
And you haven't been in school.
No, no, I haven't. So at the ripe age of 16, I really wanted my diploma. My three older siblings never got to go to school. They didn't get their diplomas. And I wanted to go and get my diploma. And I knew the only way for me to do this was I'm going to have to run away so I can go to school. So I was the rebel of the family. And I ran away. Of course, there was only one place for me to go, and that was to my grandparents, right? So it wasn't necessarily the safest place to go, but it was the only place for me to go. And at least I was able to go to school if I ran away to my grandparents' house. And the abuse there was less than it was with my stepfather.
Hmm. You had to choose the lesser of two evils.
That's correct. That is
Hmm.
correct.
And so at some point, your stepfather, though, comes to get you. He's not going to let go that easily.
No, and come to find out, this is going to be a lifelong pattern with my stepfather coming after me. And so I did live with my grandparents, but for probably about 6 to 7 months, right? One of the things that I didn't realize that I did, and I just was naive to it, was when I went to go sign up to high school at the age of 16, and they're like, "Okay, where did you go to school?" Well, I've never been in school. Right? It raised red flags. Why it was not investigated further into it, I don't know, but it definitely raised red flags where it did prohibit my father and my stepfather and my mother from coming to get me for a while, right? They were like, "Oh, you know what? We're just going to keep, our hands off." And that's when they started labeling me as the troublemaker. So now I'm labeled with this, this horrible, "You're just a troublemaker. You're just rebellious." All because I wanted to get a degree and get my diploma. How dare I do this? So, but you're right, it doesn't stop him from continuing to try to come after me, take my money, um, trying to lord over my life. Narcissists don't let go of their control, if you will.
Yeah,
So, and of course, I didn't know what I was dealing with at the time.
yeah. At some point, your grandfather kind of steps in as a protector,
He
but
did.
then he's ripped away.
He's ripped away. So, So during this period of, the stepfather still trying to intervene, still trying to get to me, my grandfather, at this point stopped, molesting me, and he did become moreover my protector, where he wouldn't allow my stepfather to take my money, and was keeping him at bay, if you will. Um, so when I was 17, coming about 17 and a half, it was April of 19, I graduated in 1989. So yeah, April of 1989. And this is just a really difficult, a pivotal point in my moment, in my life, if you will, that my Uncle Steve, um, some things progressed in my grandfather's home, and my Uncle Steve ended up shooting my grandfather and himself. So it was another just huge pivotal moment. I don't know how to deal with these emotions. There was nobody there to help me through those emotions. They're trying to deal with their own emotions through this, right? So it just, the pain was so severe. There was so much pain that I thought I physically was going to die from this event that happened. And so, to the best of my capabilities, you shove it down because, other people need help, and there's no time to process it, right?
Well, and you
It's
probably at this point realize that it's almost free game for your stepfather again because your protector is gone.
right. It was absolutely free game at this point for my stepfather. This is when I graduated, and that was the pivotal point where, like, you know what, I'm going to move to Portland with my biological father, which I didn't know, right? I only met him once or twice during that age of being like 16, 17. So I didn't know him. He was not around in my life. But now I started, though, my pattern, or to continue that pattern of running, right? I started that pattern at least, when I ran away to my grandparents.
Yeah.
Was But maybe I started that pattern of running before that, and I just don't remember it. Um, but now I'm going to reestablish that pattern with running away to Portland with my father to get away from my stepfather. So now we've definitely have established a pattern of running away from my stepfather.
Yeah. And running to
Another
someone,
man.
yeah, another man.
Mhm.
So it doesn't work. The reason why your father and you aren't connected is because of he had PTSD. There's just a story there. But so at 16, 17, you connect, but it doesn't really work out, right? To live with him.
It doesn't. I was dealing with my own messed up world, if you will, my emotions. I had no emotional intelligence. I had no grounding. And you got to remember, there was no such thing as safe. And no man was safe, right? No person was safe. I've never had one individual in my entire life that was safe for me to be around. I mean, that's not today, but I'm talking about in my past. So you got to remember, you have this young, now 17, 18-year-old girl who knows there's nowhere safe in the world.
Mm.
Nobody's safe to be around. So I ended up running away. Even though I was 18, 19, I ended up running away from my stepfather. I mean, excuse me, from my biological father. I couldn't handle living with him, because he wanted me to do certain things. He wanted a certain type of control over me. Not that it was negative or bad, but, we're going to lay down some laws, some rules. I'm like, no way. That's not going to happen. And so I took off, and if I didn't know how to deal with somebody who is angry with me, and there was just that, there was no understanding why somebody would be angry with me, but all I know is anger means danger. Anger means that you're going to get it, right? You need to run to be
Yeah.
safe.
So nothing necessarily happened, but just a lot of triggers. There were a lot of bells and whistles going off saying you need to run.
Correct. Yes, yes.
Okay. And so you do, and you end up going into a few relationships.
Right, right. It was a repetitive momentum, if you will, that um, as I was still trying to escape from my stepfather. So if I was away from another male, quote unquote, figure, my stepfather would always enter the scene to come and get me, to vile things that he wanted to do to me. So it would hit that trigger point of, and I think this kind of started again, if I go back to my grandfather, is that he wasn't allowed to abuse me if my grandfather was around, right? So I know that if I'm around another male figure, that he's not allowed to abuse me. So
Yeah.
you see that this pattern has started. Now I have to go find a man. It may not be a good man, but I got to find somebody that is a lesser evil than my stepfather to protect me from my stepfather, even though it's an unhealthy relationship.
Yeah. So you're stuck in this men aren't safe, but they're necessary to
Right.
protect me from my stepfather. Because
Correct.
he does keep popping up. It's not just a fear that you carry from your childhood. He literally keeps coming. He comes or, comes after you while you're in Portland.
That's right, absolutely he does. And even at one point, I was going to purchase my own home. I was single, and I was purchasing a home for me and my children, and I had to give up the home, and I had to stop the procedures of purchasing it because he came over and was letting me know. He came into the kitchen. He's like, "You're going to put my name on the house, and you need to give all the inheritance to your kids over to me and put me on their inheritance." And I mean, he just totally inserted his life. And my mom is standing in the kitchen, silent, not saying anything, giving me that look, right? Give me that silent conversation, the secrets. She knows what's down, she knows what's going on, but of course, remember, she's a victim also. So it's that silent conversation that victims have between each other where we're not allowed to have an opinion, we're not allowed to have a voice, that they've got us in this fear mode that we have to do whatever they say. And of course my mode then is, of course, run and escape.
Yeah. Because at this point, you have 4 kids, 3 kids,
I've got 4 children.
4 kids. And so you're an adult, have a career now, and you're going to buy a home. And because he's exacted this control your whole life, you don't see another option than to
No,
just walk away from buying the home.
right. Nobody gave me another option. If you don't know something available, you never seen it, nobody's ever described it to you, then how do you know there's another option?
Right. Well, so you do get married to you have 4 children, you're married throughout that time. And the options of, say, court, you were introduced to that and it wasn't a good turnout. Tell us about that.
Um, I'm sorry, can you repeat that question? I didn't quite catch it.
Yeah, just that you said there really wasn't a way for you to know about an option. And one option that people may listening say, what about the court system? Well, you did have an interaction with the court system, but it didn't go like people might expect.
No, people think that these abuse, you just like, oh, well, the courts will protect you. They don't. One, they don't have any experience or know what domestic violence really is, and how it works and what happens with a victim. So I going into the court system because I allowed myself to be abused, because I had communications and I was around my mother and my siblings at times, which of course they are all around my stepfather. And because that my children had any type of contact with my family, I was deemed unfit as a mother because I allowed my children to be abused and I allowed myself to be abused. And one of the stipulations that the court did put on me is that I would have no contact at all with anybody I knew.
Hmm.
So that means that I'm not allowed to have any type of contact with any of my family whatsoever. Do you see it? But they did take my kids away from me also.
So they're acknowledging that you're abused.
Mhm.
And this is abuse from, in some cases, your ex-husbands.
And definitely from all of them. Absolutely.
So the courts are saying, yes, you were abused by these people.
Mhm.
And for that, we're going to leave your children with some of these people that have abused you.
Right. And my children, even till today, are still trying to heal and cope with the abuse that they went through. They were tremendously neglected and emotionally and physically abused.
And they were with their birth fathers.
They were. They were with their birth
So
father.
this isn't, just to be clear to our audience, this isn't like it's your family who, your
No,
stepfather or your grandfather who is obviously
it was
passed.
their birth fathers who
So they
abused
were
them.
taken away from you to be given to the abusers,
Mhm. Correct.
but you're the unfit mother.
Correct.
Hmm.
Yes.
So now that you've stopped taking, you stopped this buying of the home, what was next for you? Do you get your children?
No, no. So the next step that I took was, and this was my mid 30s, if you will. Yeah, I think I was around 35, is that I ended up stepping into another relationship, not because there was love or anything else. This had nothing to do with being bonded emotionally, in love with somebody. This was survival, you guys. This isn't about a white picket fence. There was no illusion in my eyes that I'm going into a place where I'm going to be loved, um, and I'm going to have that white picket fence. I knew from the time I started being abused that life doesn't dish out those flowers for us, or for everybody. But I ended up marrying another man and moving in with him, and be to stop the pursuit of my stepfather. And he puts my stepfather at bay. But guess what? It's not going to be a bed of roses, if you will, living with him, because he is also turns out to be an abuser.
Hmm. So do you then, now at this point, you're living with this husband and your youngest son,
Correct.
and you find out that your youngest is being abused as well?
Right. Yeah. So my youngest son is being definitely abused by this man, and one of the things with my youngest son is that when he was born autistic. So there are just certain ways that you work with an autistic child, that they need to be nurtured and cared for, certain routines. It's not always all that easy, but he's one of the best most gentle. I mean, you want to talk about learning to be loving and compassionate. It was that little boy who taught me what true unconditional love was. But for my ex husband, they viewed him as a travesty, and they viewed him as a necessary evil if they want to be with me, right? So the abuse starts with him, but it will progress. And, the verbal abuse was, and the emotional and the mental abuse was always there between me and my ex. But he started to really take it out on the children, starting with Nathan, and abusing even my older children when would come and visit. So he was an angry man. He even abused the boys in the Boy Scouts that I took my son to. And I was an assistant den leader at that time. So the man was just angry, and he abused those who were weaker than him. So children were his prey.
Mm. And is there any um, like legal stance against these abusers that ever happen?
There really isn't. One of the things about with the court, you can't go in like, oh, they're emotionally abusing. If you want to get them on physical abuse, you got to have the pictures, you got to have the police reports. There's got to be more than one time, right? And it's got to be, I mean, you got to call 911. They got to come at the scene. I mean, there's so much to it to try to get somebody through the court system acknowledged as an abuser. So it really was, when he choked my son, and this was out in public, by the way, so this is not like it was done in the house. He did it at a store. And I took my oldest son, and I left the premises. And again, I did the whole, I'm going to run away from the abuser. He can have everything. They get all the money, they get the house, everything, but I'm going to take myself and get my child to safety.
Yeah. And where are you going to go?
You're right. I have nowhere to go. So, one of the great travesties of being in an abusive relationship, you don't establish long-term relationships, right? Um, and you don't establish, or you don't have that in really anywhere safe to go. What am I going to go back to my mom's house where the abuser's at? My siblings are in a similar situation, and they're dealing with their own demons. They're not healthy. They're just as abusive. And you need to fit into their story, and they're going to treat you like they did in the past, which is unhealthy. So where do you go? So I did end up moving in with a friend from high school, and he was a guy, and it was just kind of a roommate type of situation, but that turned out to be a very, very bad decision. But then I don't know where else was I going to go. There just wasn't.
What made it a bad decision?
He ended up having his own mental health issues, PTSD, his own trauma that he went through, and he became extremely volatile and extremely violent. He was just a very, very violent, dangerous person.
So yet again, you're seeking refuge and you just find another fire to jump into.
Right. Exactly. And people like, well, aren't there shelters? No, there's not shelters. People say that, oh, just go to a shelter, but there is no shelters.
Mm.
Try to go into a shelter yourself. You're going to find that they're not available, and they're not there, especially back then. Today it's way better than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. but it's not that easy, and it is a very temporary situation, but you're further traumatized when it comes to being in a shelter, because they have a different level of trauma that happens. So there really wasn't at that point anywhere for me to go. And just to bring that home, is that I realized that we can actually lose our life. I was afraid for our life. So I did move out of that place, but where I went was just unspeakable from there.
And that was,
I had to move in with my stepfather.
mm,
And it was right at the time that my mother passed away from the domestic violence. And with about a day or two after the funeral, he came up to me. He said, I hope I didn't do or say anything that caused this.
and what caused it besides the decades?
They found his morphine pills in her system.
And they believe that she took them,
Mhm.
and you believe he gave them to her?
Absolutely, he did, if not helped her take them. Yes.
Mm, mm, yeah. So now you're living with the original terrorizer that's created this string of just unspeakable abuse and loss.
Mhm.
What do you do?
Right. So it didn't last for long. He started sexually coming on to me. He was wanting me to cook and clean, but also give him womanly affection. He's doing his own drugs. Just just a nasty, nasty individual. So I ended up moving in with a guy that I knew in high school, again with him and his family, which again, of course, was just unhealthy situation all the way around. But again, run, escape. I had nowhere to go, so now me and my youngest son is living in a place that just was not suitable, but it was better than living with my stepfather.
Yeah. So now you, he's still around, by the way. Do you feel like is he still something that you expect to pop up? Is he still actively terrorizing you?
Mm. No, so before I left Oregon, and I ended up leaving Oregon after my last relationship, right? So I blocked his number, I blocked him from my Facebook, I blocked him from his life. I've had to block my own siblings from my life because I'm not going to have this man in my life. And I know if I have my siblings in my life, he comes along with them.
Mm.
I packed up 2 bags. I packed 2 bags and I left for Florida. Florida. And so so there I was for several years in Florida. And it was actually really nice because I didn't have anybody around me whatsoever that ever hurt me. It's like the abuse just stopped. The terror stopped. And I was able to take a deep breath and be safe for the first time in my life.
So
And
you
I
left.
learned that being alone
Yeah.
was safe.
So you
That's
left this time to a whole nother state
mhm,
where you knew no one.
right.
So instead of running to another person, you sort of ran to yourself.
I ran to myself. Right. And there is where I found safety. That's
Mm.
where I finally found peace and found that place that I can heal. But there
And
was a traumatic circumstance that led up to that. And that,
yeah,
yes, of that very last relationship that I
yeah.
was in.
Tell us about that.
So I was with a guy in Oregon, and again, it's that same abusive narcissist. And come to find out, he was also on drugs. I mean, it was just ugly. It was just a kabobbled mess, if you will. And through that, as I was dealing with that relationship, I was also still in the court. I was battling with Nathan at the time, or for my youngest son at the time. I was battling in court with him, and I had an attorney, and I paid the attorney, and had a retainer. But come to find out, um, that my attorney gave me a fake case ID, and she gave me papers that she filed and had the judge's signature on it, but it was actually a forged signature, and my any of my papers that I needed to be filed was never filed. Everything was fictitious. And yeah, she was found guilty. She did this to numerous people. But however, I, I was victimized by the courts because they would not reverse their rulings. And they said that the attorney is not responsible, that I am responsible for the filings, and that I should have known and taken the steps to assure and make sure that those were true court filings, and that she was doing what she was supposed to be doing, and did my own research and intervened. So they would not reverse the rulings, and they took my youngest son away from me over what another attorney did.
So you now can't even trust someone that you've paid to do
Correct.
their job, and you lose your youngest son.
That is correct. That's correct.
And this is when it wasn't just his father, that there was kind of a collusion, wasn't there, between exes?
There was. So one of my exes is kind of the ringleader in it, and his mission and purpose was whatever was going to hurt me the most and destroy me. That's what he wanted to happen. So he was kind of the orchestrator in me losing all of my children. And me losing my three oldest children was well before I lost Nathan, due to what that attorney did to me. That was in my late 20s, early 30s that that happened with my
Mm.
three oldest children. And that was one of the worst, I would say, tragic experiences that I had in my life. I mean, when you got people coming together to attack you in the court system, and you don't have anybody, and you don't have a lot of money, they can absolutely drown you in the court system and be able to really abuse you severely through the court system. And that's what they did.
Yeah. So, what was the last straw that left you to go to Florida?
Mm-hmm. So I just lost my youngest son in the court system, and I was just kind of at the point now. I'm just done, right? I'm done with it. I can't lose anymore. And when I say I lost everything, my mother's dead. I have no family. I have no friends. So I'm not saying necessarily just financially, but I lost my children and my children in my heart. And now I have not even my youngest son anymore. And I was just done. And I told my ex at the time, get out. I don't want nothing. Go make somebody else miserable, right? Go make somebody else's life miserable. You're just a miserable person. And I told him, it's over and get out. And I made that mistake back to the house. And when I went back to the house that evening after work, is where he kidnapped me in the backyard and held me against my will and threatened my life to stab me that evening. Um, but I was just at that point where, Don, I was dead inside. I just didn't care. So when he was like yelling and screaming at me, and he said he's going to go get that knife and he's going to stab me to death, and I won't say exactly what he said because it's pretty vulgar. But I, I didn't move. I didn't try to protect myself, and I sat there and I waited for him to kill me. I thought about my children. I don't have my children. They're kind of older at this point, anyways, and they're in a better place than ever being with me, anyways. So it's my time to die. I get to die. I was ready. I was so ready to die at that moment.
Hmm. And but you didn't.
And he didn't, right? And there was the pivot point to my new life. You see, I didn't care what anybody thought anymore. If I wanted to die and I was happy, then trust me, there's no care, there's no shame, there's no judgment, there's nothing, right? So there was that pivot, there is that pivotal point where my whole life changed. Now, because I didn't care what other people thought, I just started living life on my own terms and in the smallest ways, right? Um, if I wanted to wear blue, I wore blue. If I wanted to eat a hamburger for dinner, that's what I did because I didn't care what anybody thought. I didn't care how I looked, nothing. I was just simply living life on my own terms, even though it was small steps.
Yeah. What do you think that shift was, that you went from one moment thinking, I get to die, like it sounds like you were going to have some relief almost,
Right.
and it not happening, feeling this almost freedom, this personal freedom to go on because you didn't care what other people thought.
Right. There was almost, I would say, down in anger. I felt I was cheated,
Mm.
right? There is one thing that victims do and survivors want in their life, and that's freedom. And so I really felt that was stolen from me. But at the same time, what I didn't realize at that moment, that it was fueling a new fire in me. It sparked something new in me. I just didn't know at that given point in time. I didn't realize what kind of fire it started until after I moved to Florida. But at this point, what I did know is that, yep, he's in prison. I had to go through the trial by myself. There was no support. But the district attorney asked me after I testified against him at the second trial. Um, she goes, how did you do it? She goes, we can't get other victims to testify against their abuser. What makes you different? And how did you do it? And at that point in time, I didn't know why I was able to do and what really shifted in me during that time. But I did tell her, when I find out, I'm going to come back and I'm going to help. I said, but I need to go find out first.
Wow.
And that really was the moment that the Lifehouse Project was conceived. I just didn't realize it then, right? All I know is the trial's over. I'm dumping my whole life. I'm grabbing 2 bags of clothes and I'm headed to the farthest point away from Oregon as I could get. So, and that happened to be Florida.
Yeah. So it's almost like you had this taste of almost having freedom that was going to be death, but instead it's just a death of that life.
It was the death of that life. It was a total death. And I don't want any other person to have to go to that point to change their life. Um, but absolutely, I started just a whole new habits, a new life from that point. There was just no way I wasn't going back to that old life. I just couldn't. It wasn't even an option. It wasn't even a thought.
Yeah.
To me, it's like, what now? Who am I? Right? So that
Yeah.
was the first point where I actually asked myself, who am I? But I didn't let anybody disrespect me either. It was like my eyes were unveiled to people, and that I was able to look at people for who they are and know that, wait a minute, that person's acting out of ego. This person's acting out of selfishness, where before I couldn't see any of that.
Mm.
But now it was such with clarity that it almost scared me, that I was like, oh my gosh, I'm kind of reading people, right? And that's when I even separated, not just from my siblings, but I also separated completely from my father, and where I set boundaries with him. And I just didn't care. He's like, who do you think you're talking to? He goes, I know exactly. I said, who do you think you're talking to? Right? Because I'm not the same person anymore. So whoever that person was in the past is dead. This is a new person. And so it rocked his world too. I'm not saying that maybe I handled it in the most healthy way, but this new person had boundaries. This new person now felt empowered. You took everything. I don't have anything to lose. I'm empowered now. Now I'm dangerous.
Yeah. You were able to have a choice in who you get to be.
Right, right. I'm like, who do I want to be? I could be anything I want to be.
Mm.
Who am I? What makes me feel good? What doesn't make me feel good? And what do I want to eat? What do I don't want to eat? And I felt good being by myself. I love living by myself and being alone. I mean, there's a sense of freedom in that.
Mm. Yeah. And now where are you with your children?
Mhm. I've got a really, really close relationship with two of my children, my two youngest ones. I mean, I am giving them every tool and resource that I know that I have, and teaching them and helping them be empowered and to heal from all the trauma that both of them have gone through. My
Mm.
relationship with my two oldest children is strained still. My oldest one wants that relationship, but he right now is dealing with addiction and he's living on the streets. So I probably don't have to explain how hard that is, waking up every morning not knowing if he's alive or dead. I always try to, not try, I do stay in contact with him. He reaches out to me every once in a while. Um, and it's that constant prayer of, let something happen to intervene to save his life, please. um, because I just don't want to wake up and lose one of my children. God, I've had so much loss already, and I'm just like, God, does not my children, let something happen to intervene in his life.
Mm.
to save him from the life of drugs and alcohol, and living on the streets. And then my second oldest child, it's just a strained relationship because he just doesn't know how to bond and know how to communicate. And he's married, um, but it's just not comfortable right now. He's not at that place right now to try to come and bond with his siblings and or me. So there's that distance in there. So a lot of prayer there also to that something happens that we can come together and heal from the trauma that's been in their life and in our life.
And is that along with your mission of creating Lifehouse Project? Um,
Yeah.
it seems to encompass children and, of course, women. Is that the driving force?
It really is. And I don't want other women and children to have to suffer like me and my children have suffered.
Powerful words from a woman who has taken back her power and is doing so much good with it. Thank you so much for your time, Samantha, for your movement, for this platform. And I hope that you out there will be encouraged by her story. And to learn more about the Lifehouse Project, go to lifehouseproject.org. And if you're a survivor or a victim, please reach out to us at survivors@lifehouseproject.org. If you are interested in sharing your story as well, you can let us know there. And please tune in next time for another story of survival and hope at Best Kept Secret. See you next time.